Under the neon glow of Las Vegas, it was easy to believe that people could disappear without the city noticing. The lights were always too bright, the nights too loud, the crowds too endless. She had arrived there with the same belief many others carried, that reinvention was possible, that the past could be folded away and replaced with something sharper, faster, more alive. She told herself that Vegas didn't judge, it only watched, and if you played your role well enough, it rewarded you. She worked nights, slept days, and lived somewhere in between. The club was never quiet, even after closing. Music lingered in her ears long after she stepped outside, the bass echoing through her chest as she walked to her car. Co-workers knew her as friendly but guarded, the kind of person who laughed easily but never said much about where she went after work or who she spent her time with. Regular customers remembered her face, but not her story. In a place like that, stories were optional. The last confirmed sighting of her came near dawn. Security cameras caught her leaving the club alone. Hoodie pulled up, phone pressed to her ear. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look rushed. She looked like someone finishing another ordinary shift in an extraordinary city. A few hours later, her phone went silent. No calls, no messages, no location pings. It was as if she had stepped out of the frame and taken herself with her. At first, no one panicked. Missed shifts weren't unheard of. People in Vegas drifted in and out of each other's lives without explanation. But by the third day, her manager reported her missing. Her apartment told a quiet story, clothes still hanging in the closet, makeup neatly arranged, a half-finished cup of coffee dried on the counter. Nothing looked packed. Nothing looked disturbed. It was the kind of stillness that made people uneasy, the kind that suggested a sudden interruption rather than a planned departure. Police treated the case cautiously. There were no signs of forced entry, no immediate evidence of a crime. Friends were questioned, co-workers interviewed. Some mentioned a man who had been asking about her, always sitting near the stage, always watching too closely. Others said she had talked about leaving Vegas, about starting over somewhere quieter. None of it added up to anything solid. Leads appeared and vanished just as quickly. Weeks passed. Flyers faded under the desert sun. Online forums filled with speculation. Theories growing darker with each unanswered question. Some believed she had left on her own, escaping a life that demanded too much. Others feared the city had finally taken its toll. Her name slowly slipped out of daily conversations, replaced by the next headline, the next story. 2 months after she disappeared, a call came in from hundreds of miles away. An abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of a small Colorado town had drawn complaints. Strange smells, broken windows, signs of recent activity where none should have been. When officers entered the building, they expected squatters or drug activity. But what they found instead stopped the search teams cold. She was alive. The room was bare except for a stained mattress on the floor and a small table cluttered with empty bottles. The walls were damp, the air heavy and sour. She sat curled against the corner, knees drawn to her chest, eyes wide but distant. It took several minutes before she responded to her name, as if she needed time to remember it. Medics said she was dehydrated, malnourished, shaken in ways that couldn't be measured by machines. News traveled fast. Headlines framed it as a miracle, a survival story against impossible odds. But the truth was messier, quieter, harder to digest. She spoke very little during the first interviews. Her voice was soft, fragmented, often trailing off before finishing a sentence. Investigators noticed that certain details caused her to shut down completely. The drive from Vegas, the warehouse, the time in between. What could be confirmed was disturbing enough. She had been taken out of Nevada under false pretenses, convinced to trust someone she thought she knew. The journey blurred together in her memory, long stretches of darkness broken by brief moments of awareness. She didn't know why that warehouse was chosen or how long she had been there. She only knew that time stopped making sense after a while, days blending into a single, endless night. As she was transferred to a hospital, cameras flashed and reporters crowded the entrance. She turned her face away, shielding herself from the attention she never asked for. The city that once swallowed her without notice now demanded answers she wasn't ready to give. And while the world focused on the relief of her rescue, investigators quietly began asking a different question. Not how she survived, but how she had been taken so easily in the first place. The hospital room was too bright, too clean, too quiet. Machines hummed softly beside her bed, measuring things she couldn't feel anymore. Nurses spoke gently, as if volume alone could break her. Every sound seemed distant, like it had to travel through water before reaching her. When she closed her eyes, the warehouse came back in pieces, never whole, never in order, just fragments. A door slamming, cold concrete, the smell of damp metal and old oil. Doctors said her body would recover faster than her mind. Bruises faded, cuts healed, but when questions came, her thoughts scattered. Time inside that place hadn't moved normally. Days weren't marked by sunlight or clocks. They were measured by hunger, by footsteps outside the door, by the brief moments she was left alone long enough to breathe without fear. Investigators waited before pressing her for details. They knew trauma erased edges, blurred faces, rearranged memories. Still, they needed something, anything, that could point them toward who did this and how. When she finally spoke, it was never in a straight line. She described sensations more than events. The vibration of a vehicle beneath her body, the sound of a voice she couldn't fully remember, calm one moment, sharp the next. She remembered being told everything would be easier if she stayed quiet and cooperative. That sentence stayed with detectives. They retraced her last days in Las Vegas. Phone records showed brief calls to a number that had since been disconnected. Surveillance footage revealed a man standing near her car the night she vanished, his face turned away from the camera at just the right angle. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm what many had suspected. She hadn't left on her own. Meanwhile, the warehouse told its own story. Forensics found signs of recent habitation, restraints discarded carelessly, food packaging purchased from nearby towns. Whoever brought her there had known the area well enough to avoid attention, but not well enough to erase themselves completely. Tire tracks suggested repeated trips. Someone had been coming and going. As news outlets dug deeper, the tone shifted. The miracle narrative gave way to something darker. Commentators questioned why it had taken so long to find her. Why an abandoned building could hide someone for months without notice. Her name became a symbol of vulnerability, of the gaps in systems meant to protect people who lived on the edges of society. She watched some of the coverage from her hospital bed, then asked for it to be turned off. The way they talked about her felt wrong, like they were discussing a character instead of a person. She wasn't brave, she wasn't reckless, she wasn't a lesson. She was tired. She wanted silence. She wanted to sleep without jolting awake at every unfamiliar sound. After she was discharged, she was moved to a secure location. Therapy sessions began immediately. The therapist never rushed her, never pushed for a complete story. They worked instead on grounding, on reminding her that the door was unlocked now, that no one was waiting outside. Some days she could talk. Other days she stared at the floor, tracing invisible lines with her fingers, lost somewhere far away. Slowly, details surfaced. She remembered agreeing to a ride after work, someone offering help when her car wouldn't start. She remembered thinking it felt rude to say no. That moment haunted her more than anything else. The ordinary politeness that opened the door to everything that followed. Law enforcement connected the dots across state lines. Similar reports emerged, quieter ones that never made headlines. Women who had vanished briefly, returned shaken, unwilling or unable to explain what happened. Patterns formed. Routes overlapped. A network, not just a single act of violence. An arrest came quietly, without cameras or breaking news alerts. A man with a history that raised too many red flags in hindsight. Properties linked to him were searched, evidence mounted. Still, much of what happened to her would never be proven in court. Too much time had passed. Too many moments had dissolved into shadow. She could walk out on her own. The air outside was cold and real, and the sky was wide enough to breathe under. And even though the past remained unfinished, one truth stayed with her. Steady and unchanging, she had survived something that was meant to erase her, and that survival, fragile as it felt, was hers alone. Recovery did not arrive all at once. It came in small, almost unnoticeable moments. The first time she drank a cup of coffee without her hands shaking. The first night she slept for more than a few hours straight. The first time she stepped outside and realized the air no longer felt threatening. These moments didn't feel heroic. They felt fragile, like they could disappear if she acknowledged them too loudly. The legal process moved on without her needing to be present for most of it. Statements were recorded. Evidence was cataloged. Dates were set and delayed. She learned quickly that justice was slow and imperfect, shaped by rules that didn't always align with the truth people carried inside them. Some questions would never be answered. Some memories would never fully return. She was told this was normal. She didn't find that comforting, but she accepted it. What stayed with her most wasn't the warehouse itself, but the silence surrounding it. How easily the world had continued while she was trapped in a place where time barely existed. That realization changed the way she saw everything. Crowds no longer felt anonymous. Empty buildings no longer felt neutral. Every space seemed to hold the potential for stories no one knew were unfolding. She cut contact with nearly everyone from her old life. Not out of anger, but necessity. Vegas felt unreal now, like a dream she had once lived inside. She didn't blame the city anymore. Cities, she realized, didn't take people. People did. Circumstances did. Small choices did. She had stopped trying to trace it all back to a single moment because there wasn't one. It was a chain, and any link could have broken it. Therapy forced her to confront something she had avoided: survival guilt. She struggled with the knowledge that others might not have made it out, that she had been found while so many remained missing. Her therapist reminded her that survival wasn't a moral victory or a failure. It was an outcome. Nothing more, nothing less. Accepting that took time. Months passed. Her body regained strength faster than her confidence. She learned her limits again, tested them carefully. Crowded places were still difficult. Sudden noises still made her heart race, but she no longer froze. She breathed through it. She stayed present. That alone felt like progress. One afternoon, she asked to see the case file. Not all of it, just enough. She wanted to understand what had been done in her name, how her absence had looked from the outside. The pages were clinical, distant, dates, locations, observations. Nowhere did they capture what it felt like to sit in that warehouse, counting footsteps, wondering if anyone still remembered she existed. She closed the folder and didn't ask for it again. She eventually agreed to speak, not to the media, but to a small group working with missing persons advocacy. She didn't give details. She didn't describe violence. She talked instead about vulnerability, about how ordinary trust could be manipulated, how easy it was to misjudge danger when exhaustion and routine took over. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. The room stayed silent, listening. For the first time, she felt seen without being consumed. Her story changed the way some people thought about disappearances, not as mysteries fueled by drama, but as slow failures of attention, as moments when no one noticed until it was almost too late. She never called herself an advocate. She didn't want a label, she just wanted her experience to mean something beyond pain. On the anniversary of her disappearance, she went somewhere quiet. No cameras, no statements. Just open land and a sky that felt endless in a way that no longer frightened her. She stood there for a long time, letting the wind move around her, reminding herself that she was present, solid, real. She understood now that healing didn't erase what happened. It reorganized it. The warehouse would always exist in her memory, but it no longer defined the edges of her life. It was a chapter, not the whole story. Some nights were still hard, some mornings still felt heavy. But she had learned something important. Fear lost power when it was named, when it was shared carefully and on her own terms. Silence had once been used against her. Now she chose when to break it. The world eventually moved on, as it always did. Headlines faded. New stories replaced hers. But she didn't feel erased by that anymore. She didn't need constant remembrance to validate her survival. She was alive. She was moving forward. And that, in the end, was not a miracle or a headline or a lesson. It was simply the truth.